few years ago, I attended a conference in the Rockies in Colorado, just outside of Boulder. It was and they still meet there or in that area. It's called the Purposeful Planning Institute, where it's a combination of financial advisors, attorneys, CPAs, insurance agents, and people like me, people who have a background in quote unquote the soft sciences. We were there outside for a dinner in this lovely setting with the Rockies in the background, and had a keynote speaker who asked some questions that just hit me it was just a gut punch when I first heard these questions. He asked us if we knew the names and something about all 8 of our great grandparents. And of course, he also asked us about our grandparents and what we knew about them. And less than half responded. I knew one grandparent, and I never met any of my great grandparents, and I knew very little about them. Why is it important? It's a part of our legacy, and it begs the question, what will our grandchildren and even our great-grandchildren think and feel and know when they hear our names 50, 75 years from now? How will we be remembered? Another story. Perhaps you heard of Gary Hirschberg. He was used to be the owner. He started the Stonyfield Yogurt, Stonyfield Farm, a very popular yogurt company. And he was very successful and built the company on environmental awareness and social responsibility as foundational principles essential to the bottom line. He was the first yogurt maker to actually pay farmers not to use growth hormones. And the company donates 10% of its profits to ecology and the environment and conservation causes. He was troubled by something in his will. He could transfer his tangible assets to his 3 children, but the idea of dying without the assurance that they understood the values that went into the growth and development of the company weighed heavily on him. As he said, there are no adjectives in a will. I kept wondering where I would appear in this document. The answer, he realized, was nowhere. If he wanted to record his principles, thoughts, stories, values, he would have to do so with another document. And that's an ethical will, sometimes referred to also as a legacy letter. This is a tool that's used to promote remembrance and values and lessons and family stories, all the kinds of material that go beyond the typical contents of a traditional will. I don't know if we could see a show of hands, maybe Rabbi, you can tell me as you see. I'm just wondering who here is familiar with ethical wills? Is it possible to actually get a show of hands? I can't hear anything at all, so.
Yeah, I see just 1 or 2 people saying they are.
And have those couple of people, have they written one? Have they written their own ethical will? Just curious.
I'm seeing some shaking heads.
Shaking heads, okay. Well, with a traditional will, we leave money in real estate. An ethical will, on the other hand, is a statement of one's values, their beliefs, could be life lessons and blessings to the next generation, notes of appreciation, all sorts of things that would be difficult to put into a traditional will. Many think of this as adding a spiritual dimension to the estate planning process. It also provides a moral compass that gives a family leader a chance to share her insights and wisdom with the next generation. Ethical wills are not legally enforceable or binding. As such, you're not constricted to use common tax and legal language, but taken together, ethical wills and a traditional will make a pretty powerful 1-2 combination. One of the first known ethical wills is credited to Jacob in the Old Testament, where he's literally lying on his deathbed, surrounded by his 12 sons, and he goes to each and every one of them and imparts his wisdom and his hopes and his dreams to them. More recently, Barry Baines, a oncology doc, who's currently in the Twin Cities, is credited with the resurgence of ethical wills. About 1990, his father was gravely ill, and Barry asked him to write a letter describing what's most important to him and why. His father looked at him like he was crazy. But a month later, before his death, a letter arrived, and in it, his father reflected on his life. He expressed pride in his children and had very few regrets, and discussed his hopes for the future. This, by the way, is Barry's most cherished possession, and he reads it annually on his father's birthday. Back in about 1990, Barry was an oncology physician working on a hospice unit. And the hospice unit has been instrumental in advancing the current surge in interest in ethical wills. While he was working on the hospice floor, there was a terminally ill patient who felt like life was meaningless. He knew he was dying soon, and knew for certain there would be no trace of him after his death. Barry suggested he write what matters most to him, his spirit. And in doing so, just a few days before this gentleman died, his spiritual suffering disappeared, and he died at peace with himself. Now, you might be getting the idea that this is kind of a deathbed letter, and they often are written. And indeed, it could be. But I think an ethical will can be even more powerful and meaningful if it's done while we're still in the prime of our life. The best time to write one is, at a particular event. I wrote one for my son at his bar mitzvah. He's engaged and will be getting married in May, and I'm planning to write another one for that. And there are other life events that where one can certainly write an ethical will. But doing so when we're still in our prime gives us an opportunity to bring healing where it may be needed in a relationship, and it helps to communicate our wishes to the next generation, and can also be used to explain things described in the legal will. I've seen this with a family-run business where the family business owner decides to give over the reins of the business to one particular child, and goes on to explain why. So it can be used in that context too. The thing to avoid in writing an ethical will is what's often referred to as the grudge from the grave. I saw this in an ethical will written a couple hundred years ago by a father who was kind of pointing his finger at his son, saying that you'll never amount to anything and you're no good, and kind of went on and on like that in a very negative kind of way. That is indeed a grudge from the grave, and not the kind of thing that anyone wants to receive. So, and again, the other thing to remember is that this is not a legal document. It is not enforceable, but it can be used to explain things. What I really like about it is that it does speak to that notion of remembrance. What a great way to be remembered by your children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, for someone whom you're they are, if they're named after you, wouldn't it be nice for them to know something about you? In other words, it's not only about who gets the grandfather clock, but who was grandfather? What did he value? What were his hopes and dreams for his heirs? You don't have to write a lot, and you certainly don't have to write like Hemingway or Shakespeare. As an example of that, here's an excerpt. In fact, this was the whole ethical will. My dear children, I'm writing this in the bank. This is what I want from you children, Evelyn, Bernice, and Alan, to be to one another, good sisters and brother. Daddy and I love the three of you very much, and we did our best raising you and gave you the best education we could afford. Be good to each other, help one another if, God forbid, in need. This is my wish. Love all of you, your mother. Um, boy, she sure got the point across. And I bet this is a really good example of how I bet these kids aren't going to be in conflict with each other as a result of receiving this ethical will. And I know of many families that use ethical wills exactly with that in mind, to eliminate or maybe just reduce potential conflicts that might be in the family. I mentioned the life events. Another example of one, when I first started talking about these, I spoke at an estate planning council meeting here in Milwaukee a number of years ago, and an attorney said he had a client who had a brain tumor, knew she was dying, and she video recorded basically an ethical will that could be read to her children at various events in their lives, knowing that she wouldn't be there to share the that simcha with them. High school graduation, wedding, the birth of the first child, and that kind of thing. So it's a very flexible tool that has really great potential. There are also some really good practical benefits, as I see it, to ethical wills. As the leader, as a family leader, I've seen this, with a family-run business, and also families, whether or not there is a family business, their death is often significant, and some families just fall apart and unravel, and a shock wave goes through the family. Heirs are left to wonder, what would dad or mom want us to do? It's really tough when the leader leaves no clear guidelines. Children are left to interpret their wishes. So ethical wills can be used as a moral compass, and as a way of kind of guiding the next generation through the tough times, whether they're around to help them through it or not. Around issues of guardianship, wouldn't it be nice if guardians had a knowledge of parental values and wishes? An ethical will can do that. Family heirlooms. Oh boy, this is a big one. The big myth is that we fight over money more than anything else. It's just not true. We're fighting over the stuff. Who's going to get dad's baseball glove? Grandma's pie plate? Recipes from mom. These are the things that, because they're so symbolic, this is what people fight over. So an ethical will can be used to explain who gets what and why. This is a big bone of contention in many families. So it's the stuff that people fight over because it's so symbolic, and an ethical will can really help to clarify that, those issues around that. An advisor in California once told me that he has clients integrate an ethical will as part of his investment policy statement. To clarify ethical intent. He wants his clients' children to know why dad invested as he did, what was on his mind, what values were important to him. Trustees can also benefit from having a deeper understanding of the values and wishes of the originators of the trust. So one other point here as to why we leave an ethical will. I found this quote and I just love reading this, so I want to share this with you. It was written by Abraham Ellis in 1955. He was born sometime in the 19th century in Europe and later settled in Philadelphia. And it is very paternalistic. So just bear with me here. Why do I leave this will? This is a question that would not have had to be asked 100 years ago or more, when it was common for a Jew to leave not only a will of property, but a will of advice, an ethical will. A man should provide for the next generation materially. This is the duty of every father, his undeniable responsibility, but he must provide for them spiritually as well. He must seek to make their way in life easier by showing them where the path to be found which will guide them through the forest of daily living, where it is so easy to lose both body and soul. In setting down this will, then, I am but doing what countless Jews have done before me in days gone by, and what I hope will again be taken up as a sacred mitzvah by our generation. So we're in the midst of this huge wealth transfer. There is money changing hands from one generation to the next. That's the largest our country has seen. It's the largest that the world has ever seen. It started around 1998. It's supposed to go for about another 30 years, give or take. Estimates on the amount being transferred varies. I've seen it anywhere from 40 to 60 trillion dollars. Just an incredible amount of money. A lot of that is going, by the way, to philanthropy. And of course, a huge amount of it is also going from one generation to the next. And next slide, please, Rabbi. With traditional estate planning, the bottom line makes sense when you consider the possible limitations of traditional estate planning. The emphasis on death and taxes works fine for some people. From this perspective, advisors focus on a plan that is asset-focused, product-driven. It's kind of a one-size-fits-all approach that's focused on the 4 Ds. And if there's an estate planner in the audience, please let me know if I'm on target with this. Dump the assets, divide amongst the heirs, defer taxes, and dissipate the assets. It's kind of considered a shotgun approach with a significant failure rate. And ironically, estate planning is a legal process wrapped up in family stuff. And yet there's really little or no attention to the family. And as such, how can we expect success? Now, there was a study, next slide, please, Rabbi, from, I believe it was like 2005, maybe 2006. The Allianz Life sponsored this insurance company that I think originally is from Germany, where they surveyed elders, the elder generation and baby boomers, and found that a true estate plan has these 4 components. The first, if you'd click on that, there we go. The first is money and real estate, the financial assets, which is the primary focus of traditional estate planning. The next one, there we go, instructions and wishes. Bury me next to your mother. Make sure Junior gets a good education. Any sorts of instructions and wishes that one could imagine. The next one would be the possessions of emotional value. Like who is going to get the grandfather clock, dad's baseball glove. I'm wearing my, I don't know if people could see this, but that's my father's ring. My dad died in 91, excuse me. And I have 2 sisters, but I got the ring. It means so much to me, and it helps me to maintain a connection to my father. And then the last one, and the one that was given the most, emphasized the most as being the most important, were values and lessons learned and family stories. This is what became really most important to people of the baby boomer generation in particular, and to some extent the generation that came before them as well. They repeated the study a couple years later and basically got the same results. These were the 4 things that were really considered important, with, again, values, life lessons, and stories considered to be the most important. If we advance to the next slide, I want to emphasize the stories because of some other research that I just find so interesting and compelling, going back to the mid-90s. Up to that time, most of the research on family was focused on pathology. The big thing to say at the time, and we hear this a lot to this day, is my family is toxic. So there's a big focus on viewing the family from a pathological viewpoint. There were researchers in Atlanta at, I'm forgetting the name of the university there. That tested the hypothesis that people who know a lot about their families tend to do better when they face challenges. And they were working with children with disabilities, and they developed what they called the Do You Know scale, a list of 20 questions that asked, well, like, do you know how your parents met? Do you know where your mother grew up, where your father grew up? Do you know the source of your name? Do you know where your parents were married? Do you know which person in your family you look most like? Do you know some of the illnesses and injuries that your parents experienced when they were younger? Do you know the national background of your family? Do you know some of the jobs that your parents had when they were young? And it goes on. There is a list of 20. In the summer of 2001, they administered this scale, this questionnaire, to about 4 dozen families. And they found as people knew more about their family history, the respondents showed higher self-control and higher self-esteem. The Do You Know scale was the best predictor of children's emotional health and happiness. Then, soon after that, 9/11 hit. And they reassessed the children from the previous study and found very similar results. These children could, in addition to this prior results, these children could tolerate the effects of stress better. I contacted the researcher, Marshall Duke, and I asked, why do you think this is? And he speculates that being part of a far larger family, feeling like you're part of the larger multi-generational family, leads to what he calls being an intergenerational self, part of the family, the larger family field. And by the way, I had a conversation with him, and I said, is it too late for those of us those of us adults? And he said, not at all. He speculates that he says that every family has a unifying narrative, one that he calls the ascending narrative, where our parents started a business, they were hugely successful, and we lived happily ever after, or something along that line. Very positive, uplifting story. The descending narrative would be just the opposite of that. We never got the business going the way we hoped. We just lived from month to month, hoping to get by. We needed help from others, and nothing really worked out. We had a lot of illness in the family and that kind of thing. The third one is the oscillating narrative, the narrative that has its ups and downs, but we ended up doing okay. Despite adversity, we managed to get through it. He said the secret sauce for keeping your family strong is to develop a strong family narrative, a positive story about yourselves overcoming hardship. Yes, if you go down from Odessa, right where you are, to the right, up a little bit, there's Odessa, and bring it down. Right there, Ackerman, a small town there, Ackerman, right on that body of water, that inlet. That's where my family came from, on my father's side. And the story in my family is that my grandfather, who I never met, in 1913, I believe I have that year correct, traveled through Europe, boarded a boat in Hamburg, Germany, and came across the Atlantic and eventually settled in my hometown of Omaha, Nebraska. my original hometown of Omaha, Nebraska. And because we had other family members there. And 2 years later, actually, he did this in 1910. That's right, 1910. 2 years later, he, as the story goes, he was hit by a trolley car, was awarded $50 in a settlement, and sent for his wife and 3 young children. And they came across, they all got to get together in Omaha. And then soon after that, my father was born, the only one born in America. My grandfather experienced incredible hardship just making that journey, getting hit by the trolley car. I don't even know if the story is true or not. It doesn't matter. It makes for a great story. But it's one of those stories that it's I think a really good oscillating story. I find tremendous inspiration in it when I think about it, especially if I'm hit with some sort of hardship. So it's I really want to share that with you. It's one that I'm really proud of, and I have written about that because I want my son to know that as well. A few years back, I did my own research project where I content analyzed. I don't know how many ethical wills I wrote. I've written 2 books on ethical wills. The first one was a generic version, and I came up with what in doing this content analysis of these ethical wills, the acronym HEART, which stands for what I saw as some of the core or basic ingredients that people wrote about in these ethical wills. H being hopes for the future, E, experiences in life, A, appreciation, R, religion, spirituality, or core beliefs, and T, I had to find something to make the word heart work as an acronym. I used T to stand for treasures. What I found was that people would talk about maybe not fearing death. They'd write or share special quotes that were important to them. It didn't quite fit any of the other basic ingredients that I wrote about, but I thought, wow, these are just really tremendous gifts or treasures that they're writing about here that are for the next generation. And then someone had suggested at a Jewish foundation in Ohio, I said, you ought to do this from a Jewish perspective. And I did that. And that time I content analyzed ethical wills written by Jews and came up with the same acronym. So I added to the HEART model from before, and the current HEART model would be H stands for heritage. The E would be ethics. A is atonement. R, I just kept it the same, religion, spirituality, and core beliefs. And the last one, tikkun olam. Many people I found that really meaningful and wrote a lot about that. So my last book on ethical wills from words written from the Jewish heart combines the first 5 basic ingredients along with the last 5 from a Jewish perspective, so that one could write about both hopes for the future and heritage, for example, experiences in life and ethics. And I go into greater detail in my book, and I'll give you, if you're interested, I'll give you my content information. Rabbi, you said it's sold at great bookstores all over. That's actually not true. It is on Amazon or through me directly. So I'll give you that information later. So here's an excerpt from someone. Respect life, yours and others. I'm a believer in the golden rule. Treat other people the way you want to be treated. I hope you find a vocation that adds value to the world. This is my interpretation of tikkun olam. I feel lucky to have worked in hospice. Trying to relieve suffering has been a worthwhile pursuit for me. Here's another one, a short one. I've always liked this one. It's very short, but to the point. Have integrity. Your yes should mean yes, and your no should mean no. Be the person you say you are. When you peel a banana, have you ever gotten anything other than a banana? That is what integrity is. Being on the inside, who you say you are on the out. Being on the inside, who you say you are on the outside. It's not always easy, but it is always valuable. And then finally, this one is called, if you move the slide, Rabbi, tip-top condition. Dear kids, although I've been recently diagnosed as a man in tip-top condition by Dr. Lewis, I'm nonetheless reminded that time is still passing. And in a couple of years, I will have to retire from commercial farming. No, don't worry, I'm leaving farming with little in the way of regrets. It has provided your mother and me with enough money to retire. While tobacco and dairy farming gave my grandfather, father, and me a solid, respectable way to care for our families, I know each of you has other plans for your future. I want to say that I'm not disappointed in any of my children for choosing other ways of life. You have each made me proud in your own way. I'm a quiet man, and I know I have never offered much in the way of spiritual guidance. However, I hope that my manner of living has served as a living example of my own moral code. As you know, this family has had its roots here in Otter Creek since your great-grandpa Jack settled it way back in 1867. I certainly don't expect you to keep the farm. I realize that even little Eddie will follow his big brother and sister to the city. My only request is that the house and the 15 surrounding acres be preserved as a family vacation spot. I want you to bring your children to relax, fish, swim, and have fun pursuing life's simple things, but most importantly, to stick together as a family. I read that at a talk I gave in California once a few years back, and someone raised their hand and said, what if I don't want to spend that kind of time with my family? Not exactly the kind of response I was expecting, but I was really glad he brought it up because it helps to emphasize the next thing I want to mention, if you would advance the slide. And that would be the importance of having, once you've written an ethical will, to share it with the people that you're targeting this to. That can promote a conversation. And that's when that gentleman could have said, well, I'm not sure that I want to do that. I live 500 miles away and I can't get to Otter Creek. So that's when you could discuss that and kind of iron out some of the differences. But you have to meet together to do that. And I think it's just so important to share what you've written or what you've recorded visually with those that you're directing this to. By the way, I want to say too that if you're giving to philanthropy, maybe you don't have children. Writing an ethical will to the philanthropic organization also, I think, would be really important, so they know exactly, so they can help and understand the alignment between the gift that you're giving and the values that are most important to you. So I've covered a lot of material. At this point, I typically ask people to take out a pen and paper and to actually write for a minute or two what could be the start of their own ethical will. I find that a lot of people really like this concept, but find it very challenging to actually do the writing. So we can do that right now if people have something they can write with. And the other thing that you could do is to maybe you already have this in mind and you don't have to actually do the writing, but the story idea, being the intergenerational self. Remember, this is part of the estate. Remember that pillar that said that values and life lessons and stories are a big part of the estate plan for many people. What is one story you would want your heirs to know? Like I said, my story is telling my son about my grandfather and the trek he made from Russia through Germany all the way to Omaha, Nebraska, and all the ups and downs that went he experienced doing that. What's one story you would want your family to know? And Rabbi, I have to say, I just love what you said at the very beginning. What was it? This is our immortality, and we live on through these stories. What would be one story? Does anyone have a story they want to share that they want someone to know? Yeah, Emma.
I wanted to say a couple of things, and that's not directly what you're asking. Sorry about that, but being of Jewish background, and most of the family being dead through the Holocaust, I actually don't know much. I have some photos of my grandmother. I have no idea, great grandmother, could not go back that far. And my mother I grew up as a Catholic because she was a hidden Jew. So, that going back is just not possible. But what I have done sort of maybe to kind of fill in that gap is I've done a lot of oral histories. I have, taught how to do oral histories to high school students, have facilitated oral history. And I feel that talking to others and getting their stories is very important to conserve. So in a kind of in a roundabout way, I feel fulfilled from the standpoint of sharing the skills to conduct to actually talk to someone about their story and cherishing that, and then people publish books, etc. And so for me, oral history has been really has filled the gap in the sense of facilitating that for others to do. And then I was going to mention Tony's case, who comes from an Italian background, and we actually know his family in Italy, and we know some of the who was who and how many generations, but not really that much. Number one, literacy and language, those barriers. And his grandparents, 3 of them were not literate of the 4. And one of them died pretty young, the grandparents. So even though we have family there, and we ask some questions, and there have been some tracing back, but it's not complete because number one, the distance, the different continents, the language. So it's not, it's just not an easy task for some of us to fill in and to know more, and to have, as you say, have we certainly could do an ethical will for our kids, but we don't. And another thing is we have an adopted child, and so he has an entire other background that we actually don't know enough about, and he's actually trying to get more information on. So there's a lot to consider, and I really appreciate your sharing your wisdom with us. I just wanted to say there's so many other aspects to consider when you're trying to fill in the gaps, know who your family, the members of your family, who they were, and then share it. And of course, then sometimes people don't get along in families, as you mentioned, and so they're it's not an easy task. So anyway, in all of that, I just want to say thank you.
Well, thank you. You're giving people the skills for collecting those stories.
I do want to mention that one of the great parts about Eric's book is that most of it is to help you tell these stories, to help you ask these questions. So what he'll do is have an introductory section, and then he'll have like a leading quote, and then blank space for you to explore the topic. He calls them challenge questions that are sort of to lead you in thinking, how would I respond to this? So this one, the quotes are, "The food here is terrible and the portions are too small," by Woody Allen. And the other one is by Milton Berle. Anytime a person goes into a delicatessen and orders a pastrami on white bread, somewhere a Jew dies. And then the challenge question is, food, good or bad, is important to Jews. and many family memories focus on it. I recall the yellow meat grinder my father used to make chopped liver. What food-related stories come to mind? What role did food play in your family life? Write down a favorite recipe that's been part of your heritage. And so that sort of a lead in with a quote and then a challenge series of questions, and then you fill in this. And then when it's time to sit down and actually write the full thing, you've got all these wonderful building blocks that you could pick from and put together into the message that you want to share. So it's that step-by-step process that I think Eric's book does a really wonderful job of opening up the questions for you.
I forgot about that. Thank you, Rabbi, for bringing that up. It's great.
Cindy, you wanted to jump in?
Yeah, a couple of things. I was very fortunate to grow up across the street from, and sometimes living with, my great-grandmother. And so I grew up with stories of my great-great-great-grandmother. And so there are quite a lot of stories that have come down, but overall, there's just this theme of the strength of the women in our family, of them being clever, of them being very diligent in what they did. My great-grandmother was a nurse, and when she left for nursing school at the age of 18, her own mother had only gone through first grade. And so when my grandmother grew up, she would go home from school and teach her mother to read, to do math, to, have really, really basic elementary, coursework in the 1910s. And when she left for nursing school, then her mother said that despite the fact that it would have made sense for her to stay home and help raise her children and everything else, with my grandmother being the oldest of 6, she would never stand in the way of her education. And that's something that really kind of just fed through a lot of our family stories. The other thing that I wanted to mention, because I've worked quite a bit in dementia care, is doing these stories, recording this information now is not only helpful in the event that someone passes on, but for caregivers of people with dementia, they could be hugely valuable, because these are the stories, the memories, the things that are going to come up in conversation with those older adults whose memories are kind of regressing. So if you do them now, it can be helpful to yourself as well as to future generations.
Mm-hmm. Great comments. Thank you.
Oh, Eric, I was going to ask you something about the idea of having the ethical will to tell your story and who you were. It reminds me of the song near the end of the musical Hamilton, where the framing is who lives, who dies, and who tells your story, is what your legacy is. And we don't always get to tell our own stories. And even if we write the version of the story that we want, they may add their own stories too. A biography, even an autobiography, is one version of the story. And I find I work with couples and families all the time dealing with funerals. And this is not the story the person himself might have told, or even if they did write their own biography that they want shared at the service, I still talk to the families because they're going to have different perspectives. And especially I try to talk to the grandkids because they experienced a different person than the kids, because the person was 30 years older and they weren't raising them in the household the same way that they were for their own children. So I see this as creating, in some ways, one version of the story. It's the version you want told. But I don't think it's going to be the whole story. People are going to tell their own stories, and that's the way life is.
The stories may not be fact-based. And I don't think it matters that much, really, because the stories help us to feel connected to one another. And that's the part that I think is most important and most meaningful. So like I said, I don't know if my grandfather was actually hit by a trolley car and got a $50 settlement, but boy, it makes a great story. And adds to, how he made lemonade out of, a lemon, that kind of thing. So yeah, the stories aren't, I don't think it's a matter of fact checking the stories necessarily. There's probably some truth to them, but it reminds me of the old game we used to play as kids, telephone, where you pass a message on to the different people, and boy, the message sure changes by the time it gets to the very end.
It also reminds me of the film Big Fish, which is about a father who's told all these grandiose, fanciful stories to his son all these years. And the question the son has is, was any of this true, or just some of it? And in the end of the movie, I don't want to give it away for those who haven't seen it. It's really a wonderful movie. But it comes out that there's some truth to some of those stories. And it's not as exaggerated as the father told it, because he was a very sort of dramatic, big, grandiose kind of personality. But there was a kernel of truth there, and it helps the son reconnect with his father, even as his father is going. So that's where I think this, the genealogical research is one piece of it, but in this case, this is like personal archaeology, right? You're digging into yourself, you're finding out who you are and what your values are. Sometimes we don't even think about these questions explicitly, and this is a guide to help people be able to do that, so they could then express that to other people. And I think your best piece of advice, if I can dare to say to the author, your best piece of the book, is when you say, don't wait till you're dead to share this with people. This can be a very meaningful thing to share when you're alive, whether it's at a special event like a bar mitzvah or a wedding, or at a special birthday party, at your 80th birthday or 90th birthday. That would be a time to put the thought into that kind of a process and create something like that, so it can be shared with people while you're still around.
And it can, as I mentioned, it can really bring some healing to some relationships too. Sometimes just I've seen this happen where the reading of the ethical will was helped to clarify something in the family that people had misunderstood for years and years. And the relationship distance and conflict was based on that misperception. And so helping to explain things can really have a pretty profound effect on relationships within a family.
Definitely. Well, any last thoughts or questions? Yes, Emma?
I was going to say the difference between what you're saying and what the kind of thing that I do or did with oral histories is that it's even closer to the person. In oral history, someone else interviews the person, but this actually encourages the person, her or him, to be in the act of capturing what they want people to remember about them. I think the difficulty could be that, who wants to think about death? Because this is, it's a will, meaning that you're well, I guess, obviously we have to think about it. I'm just saying it's the assumption is that you are going to die, and therefore you should pass this on prior to, don't wait till you're dead, as you said. But I think there's a difficulty there, the acceptance of the end of life and then doing something prior to that. But waiting for someone else to get the story from you is not always the best, because it may never happen, right? That right. Someone may not do it. So this is that I really appreciate what you're saying, is that you're being proactive in a sense. You are passing on rather than waiting for someone else to ask you.
And I don't want to come across as being cavalier about how easy it is to write this. This can be pretty challenging. You are facing your own mortality. Prior to my son's bar mitzvah, it was two or 3 months before I could actually get it together to do the writing. I thought about it, I started writing, and I just couldn't get there. But finally it just kind of came to me in terms of what I knew what I wanted to write. And I'm kind of at that same point with his upcoming marriage. I'm not sure what I'm going to do with that, but I'll have something to share, hopefully by the end of May. But it could be pretty. It's a challenging exercise, and that's why I referred to the challenge questions in my book to try to stimulate your thinking. And the books are really guidebooks or workbooks to help you actually do the writing. In fact, there we go. Yeah, you can see they're spiral bound, really geared towards just doing the writing. And then in the final slide, the end slide, it does, there's my contact info. Really, if you are interested, the best way to get a book would be to contact me directly at my website or at that number, my cell phone. And I'm not too far away. I might even consider a personal delivery if it's a nice day.
Great. Well, any last comments or questions? Anyone else wanted to add something? Yeah, Rhonda, please.
Well, a few things. First of all, this is something that I've always planned to do. I just didn't know there was a name for it. But in my mind, I'd be doing a separate one for each of my children, not one, but now I've gotten the idea that I might do a third that's for both of them together. And another, I don't know if this is worth mentioning or not, but years ago, I had this desire to capture on video interviewing my parents. And even though I grew up with my grandparents, I wanted to get more information about like their childhood and things like that. And I thought that it would be interesting to pass on to my children. But I could tell right from the first few minutes, this was not going to work because my mother just wanted to, oh, we used to take you girls on vacations all the time. It was just like, I was a wonderful mother, wasn't I? So it wasn't working, but I think it's a good idea. So, I mean, if anyone is, wants to do it with some members of their family, whether it's parents or cousins or aunts and uncles or whatever, but to, get it on video and learn about their history in more detail. And the last thing that I'm going to say is I heard about, it's some sort of Jewish tradition that I'd never known about, like writing a diary to your children. And so I actually did this from when they were babies. And, now my children are adults. And one time when my daughter was in town, I actually gave her hers. They're not huge or anything, just like spiral bound notebooks. And she couldn't read it because it was in cursive, but she found it so boring. It was, it's like she could care less. It meant nothing to her. It was like, oh my God, I thought I'm pouring my heart out about your childhood. And I thought my kids would just love hearing about it because if someone had written something like that for me, I'd be so fascinated by it, but not really. So I guess things are different in every family.
Right. And even every person, it's challenging when you realize your kids have a mind of their own.
Right. It's like, why would I care about, why would I want to read this?
Yeah. It's not for everyone. It's not for everyone. Just like the traditional estate planning, the straightforward estate planning is, most people I'd say are probably fine with that. But this does add another dimension, I think. And I want to on one or two of the chat items real quick. Larry Dworsky, what would you think of us starting a Kol Hadash library of our family's oral histories? It reminded me, that reminds me of, there were several Jewish foundations across the country that have recorded basically it's ethical wills or oral history that's on their website, and you might want to check that out. And it's for people that have donated to the foundation. But I'd never thought of a congregation actually taking the same idea and applying it. And why not?
I'm
That's-
sorry to interrupt, but we actually did some oral histories of Hadash. Not sure where they are, but they were videos, and well, they were on, I believe they were just taped. They were not video at the time. With Rabbi Before Adam. But it, and I did, a couple of them, but they, we didn't go through all of it. But there was an idea, and I did conduct a couple of interviews. So
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of ways we could approach it. Another humanistic congregation had a memoirs writing group, and they would write, chapters or short essays, like short story versions of episodes in their lives, and then they would share them together and read them to each other, and offer some feedback and input on the writing and the style. And but that, I think, served a similar purpose of letting people write their own stories. So I actually have a whole set of essays my father wrote as part of that, telling stories of his life. And some of them were stories he had told us when he would tell us stories about when he was a kid. And some of them were stories I'd never heard before. And so it was a really valuable legacy piece to leave his memories of those stories, like the time he found a $5 bill under the boardwalk in Atlantic City and bought a Charlotte Russe like Sunday. And then the person who lost the money came by saying, "Did you see a $5 bill somewhere?" And he said, "Nope." His mouth was full, but it ate at him. It was like the Macbeth bloody hands. It was just he could not get out that spot of the Charlotte Russe on his shirt. Rich and Joyce had their hands up too. I wanted to give them a chance.
I have two thoughts. One is that the last thing I plan to do is leave a letter giving advice to my kids or giving a set of values. If they don't have the advice, if they haven't had the values that they have gained from their parents during our lifetime, words won't change it. The other side of it is, for years, I regretted not asking my parents the right questions. I noticed Rhonda mentioned the question, the area wisdom is asking the right questions. And sometimes that's hard to do. Our sons have talked about asking us to provide oral history, and the question of doing it, and then asking the right question. Let them decide what they want to know. To me, that's more valuable than my telling them what I think they ought to get.
I hear you. Thank you for your comment. I think the distinction to be made here is that it's not telling them what they should be doing. It should be kept positive. I really see this as a way of defining self for current and future generations. This is who I am. This is what's been most meaningful to me. This is what I stood for, so that future generations will know something really important and meaningful about you.
Thank you.
On that note, there was a case in the Chicago area, I want to say 8-10 years ago, where this family had left a will, but one of the provisos in the will was that if any of the grandkids had married someone who was not Jewish, they were cut out of the will. And that's, that balancing act of, there were some quotes in the Jewish heritage section of, I want you to continue Jewish continuity, and I want you to carry Judaism forward, and this is so valuable. And I thought, on one level, it's said with good intention, I think, but it can lead to guilt, and it can lead to a sense of, trying to direct from beyond the grave. There's a wonderful poem that we use in one of our memorial services. It's entitled simply Aunt Alice. And the gist of it is that Aunt Alice knew exactly what should happen. She wrote out detailed instructions of what her obituary should be and who should get her dresses and how everyone should be notified, and put it all into little envelopes so everyone would know, so that when she died, all that was left was to cry. You can't script everything.
Yeah,
You can't control
that reminds
everything.
me of some old Myron Cohen stories. Question: when someone writes for their children and grandchildren what their values were and what their aspirations were, how honest is it really? I mean, who's going to say, well, I was kind of a sleazy businessman and I was cheating here and there, and leave that to your children? I mean, can you really, you're getting this very grandiose document, but how true is it?
Well, first I want to say I haven't heard Myron Cohen referenced for many years.
I think I'm a little older than it comes across on Zoom.
But you're right. I mean, it's not. It could, the whole thing could be fabricated, I suppose. So intent is. I think it is important, and like I said, I really see this as how do I want to be remembered. And you could put an overly positive spin on it. and maybe some people will know better, maybe not, I don't know.
Larry, let me give you an example from funerals. So I do funerals for nice people, and I do funerals for people who are not so nice, and sometimes the family doesn't want to tell me anything because they don't want me to say bad things. So I sometimes will make a show of like closing my pen and putting it aside, and off the record, tell me who your father, your grandmother was. And then they'll tell me, she was really a bitter person. She was really critical, whatever. And so then my job is to present the best version of them. So if they were a very critical person, I might say she had very high standards, or she pushed you to excel. And the family knows that I'm putting a good spin on what for them felt like a problem. And so that's what this biography version is going to be. It's your best spin on yourself, or maybe you're as candid as you want to be, and you say, here's where I failed and here's where I didn't do as well. And you'll have to decide how explicit you want to be. My father, as part of this memoirs group, ultimately wrote a biography of himself. And I'll be candid, he included elements of his teenage sexual life that I had no interest in learning about. I did not want to read. He was more candid than I'd hoped for. But he was telling the story as he wanted it told. And so that's what I got. And there were times I could read through the lines and see where he's hiding something here, or he's putting a spin on it. But I still think that having his version of the story is a value to it, even if it's what he wanted said. That still has a purpose and can be gleaned for the people that really do them the best. You'll hear their voice, and if nothing else, hearing their voice is part of the point behind this. It's to stay connected to them in some meaningful way. Well, I want to thank Eric for a very stimulating conversation and discussion. I thought this was really excellent. And again, I do commend the book to you, Ethical Wills, Words from the Jewish Heart. In fact, if we have a group that wants to explore this, we might even get a set of the books and have the people work together on, going through chapter by chapter or section by section as the beginning basis for doing something like this as a personal project. We'll see if there's interest in doing that.